You should see it now.
Well, let's keep introductions short. My name is Brieke Konert. I'm the Senior Legal Counsel at the utility company Web-Bonaire. I'm a member of the management team and I report directly to the CFO. And we can continue to the next one.
Do you manage Loader?
Does it not show?
No.
Okay, let's try another.
The next one will be a picture of the current wind farm at the wind side of the island. And after we have shown that, then we can continue straight to the next one, because I will get back to the history of the wind farm and the future of it. But I first have to tell something specifics about the island of Bonaire. And I have some key data on the slide, but I can already elaborate some of it. And because of the island of Bonaire and the regulatory challenges are quite peculiar. And that's mainly because in 2010, Bonaire changed countries. Before 2010, Bonaire was part of the country of the Netherlands Antilles. And they dissolved in, yes, thank you. They dissolved in 2010, and now Bonaire is an integral part of the country of the Netherlands in Europe. But although we are a part of the country of the Netherlands and we have a direct vote in the parliament, the country of the Netherlands is actually two systems, and we had a change of law in 2010 from Antillian law to BES law. I will explain what BES is, but it's not the same as the law in continental Europe. The Netherlands is a kind of one country, two systems. You have the general European, Dutch European law system as used in the Netherlands for a very long time, but the Caribbean parts of the Netherlands, and that are actually three islands. There's the island of Bonaire and the island of Statia and Saba. And those two islands are 1,000 kilometers to the northeast. So they're nowhere close in the same country. We are neighboring Curaçao and also close Aruba, but they are all part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Curaçao and Aruba are actually different countries inside the same kingdom. And specifically for Bonaire, we had a change of law in 2010. We have our own set of rules. They are called BES law, and that's abbreviation of Bonaire, Sint Eustatius, and Saba. And that's, for most of it, it's a light form of European Dutch law, as well as some elements of the old Netherlands Antilles law. And we also have a different currency compared to the European Netherlands. Everything in Bonaire is US dollars, and that's official currency also in law. One aspect of the challenges is the change in law and change in regulation. The regulation came in 2016, and we also have a very specific challenge because of the growth of Bonaire. Bonaire is one of the islands, and it's quite unique in that way in the Caribbean, with a huge growth of population. We currently have about 24,000 inhabitants, and a lot of tourists and tourist homes on top of that. But in 2010, it was less than half. And some projections say that in the coming 10, 20 years, we may even double our population. And that has huge challenges for the island, for the government of the island, as well as for us as utility company. And we are also an integrated utility company in the sense that we do electricity, drinking water, and wastewater management. But we are not integral in that we do the power production of ourselves. A very small part of power production we do ourselves, and that's the 0.2 megawatt on the picture frame on the wall behind me. And all other power is procured by a PPA from ContourGlobal. It's a privately owned company, and they produce the power, and we transport, distribute, and provide it to our end users. And furthermore, we don't have unbundling, we don't have customer groups, so effectively we are monopoly, and ContourGlobal is also monopoly. And for that reason, both of us are fully regulated.
So ContourGlobal is the oil company?
ContourGlobal is the operates the power plant in every form. They have the power plant based on fossil fuel. They have the power plant in wind farm and the solar farm. So most of power production is from ContourGlobal. And I think we can continue to the next slide to give the regulatory framework. Both ContourGlobal as well as Webonaire as distributor are regulated. And for the regulation is possibly there is an issue with continuing to the next slide. Well, I can continue my story. We have a special law for electricity. It's also for drinking water. It's one law, and that's actually kind of a light version of European Dutch law, a very light version, with a very simple compared to what's happening in the European Netherlands. Very simple tariff structure. We have basically law, we have some additional laws, small laws, that we call in Dutch ministerial regelingen, that's soft law. And when I talk about the Department of Economic Affairs and Climate, I mean the department in The Hague, in Holland, 8,000 kilometers, 5,000 miles away from here. Because we are one country, we share departments. And that's a very long distance for law and regulation, but it is what it is. And also regulation of tariffs is done from The Hague, by Authority for Consumer and Markets. They used to have for a couple of years a local department here on Bonaire, but they stop with that, and every regulation is currently done from The Hague. And that applies to both ContourGlobal as power producer, as well as Webonaire as distributor, and responsible for end user provision. And regulation is based on two parts. We have the method decisions, and that's the medium-term regulation, and that also includes a financial model as well as the WACC. So a regulated rate of return of about 6%. It varies over the years. It varies some for distribution and production, but generally it's about 6%. And annually, or in case of electricity distribution, we have tariff decisions by ACM, and we are almost, and as utility, we need to be almost transparent to our regulator. They know almost all about this, and they put everything in almost very transparent spreadsheets, even if you like The Excel sheet used by Authority for Consumer Markets is downloadable from their website, so you can see how they calculate our tariffs. So we actually have nothing to say about our tariffs because it's all done 8,000 kilometers away. And it's all based on a number of principles. If I can have the next slide. Basically, it's a cost-based tariff, and we have some carrots to, they use to guide us to operate efficient. Like Konstantin also said, they're quite common, and many what I say will be familiar in light of Konstantin's presentation. And a non-efficient cost, they're not allowed as part of the cost base, so we really try to avoid that. And we have the WACC I told you about, some profit sharing, and we have two types of subsidies. We have end-user subsidies, I will get back to that, and we have investment subsidies. And investment subsidies are most part at production part, so in the tariff regulation of ContoGlobal, but all that will also reflect in end-user tariffs. And then the main point is, of course, we'd like to have affordable tariffs for the population. And like many islands in the Caribbean, we have a serious poverty issue. About 40% of the population lives below the poverty line. And the regulation doesn't really allow us to do any social policy or tariff distinguishment for people with less money to spend on energy. And we try to work around it, and but basically there is only one type of tariff, and that's following from the cost-based calculation, and tariffs are based on from a cost-plus perspective. And the next slide, you can see the tariff schedule based on the ACM calculations, where it says discount, that's a subsidy. We used to have a subsidy on the usage energy charge per kilowatt hour. Because we dropped below 38 cents last July, the discount stopped. But you can see for every connection capacity, there is a differentiation in connection capacity, not in customer groups, but every connection capacity group pays the same usage rate for energy charge. There is a difference in fixed monthly charge, but they are all subsidized to zero at the moment. It probably won't stay that way, but we are not sure yet. That's under consideration. And we also have a prepaid solution to make energy cost transparent and affordable to large parts of the general public. And prepaid isn't built, it's really prepaid, and it can even be bought by direct cash payment. You can get a prepaid amount at the gas station and put it on your prepaid meter. And usually there is a part of the fixed charge is part of the energy charge per kilowatt hour. That's subsidized to zero at the moment, so that you can see that the energy charge per kilowatt hour is the same for all customers. And that's one of the ways to make energy affordable. even for parts of the population who have very limited means to spend on energy. There is also a regulated charge for connection, and that's the charge in the lower part, and that only applies to residential connections. Large connections are not regulated. They are on a calculation basis. The next slide, please. What I said, we have the cost plus regulation. I saw we have a question. I will come back to that later. How we can control the tariffs is by managing our costs. That's the way we can influence tariffs. And we also have influence on the cost base for the tariff subsidies. The fixed charge is okay. I think that's a question. That's not suitable in the limited time of this presentation in this workshop. I will keep it in mind and come to you back later, Robert, because it's a really interesting question. Given the time, what we try to do in make energy affordable is two different ways. We have the tariff subsidies. We speak a lot with the consumer organization Unkelbom on the island on how to make energy affordable. And one great way to make energy more affordable is to on our path to more renewables. I will elaborate on that in the next slide, please. We have developed a plan in joint cooperation with ContoGlobal to get from 30% renewables to 80% in the near future. In one of the first slides, we showed our wind farm at the Morateen site on the wind side of the island. That wind farm that was built 15 years ago. The technology of this wind farm is not up to date. It's a pretty small turbines compared to today's standards. It's 900 megawatts per turbine, and we have 12 of them. Given what you can find.
900 kilowatts, I assume. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, of course. 0.9 megawatt, and that's really small compared to what you find onshore and offshore in Europe. So we're looking at a plan to combine several renewable technologies and create to that more optimal power mix, least cost, and what we could embed in the grid here at a great way. And because we have no connection to mainland or to other islands, this is really island-driven generation and distribution. And in the next slide, I can show the different aspects of this joint plan. We have the 12 existing turbines. We have a solar plant at 6 megawatts, and that has been in service since last summer this year. And we also have 8 megawatt an additional battery capacity. And in combination with a repowering of the wind farm to more modern standards, we could go to more than double the capacity of the wind farm. And with the wind farm, we could really drive the tariffs down, because that's the most efficient part of the whole hybrid plan. However, we also have to take into account that we have a low wind season on Bonaire. So we also have to think security of supply. And for security of supply, we have a driver also in fuel-based generation. ContourGlobal operates 10 engines for base load and 3 engines as peak shavers to provide for security of supply. In addition to that, this year the 8 megawatt batteries are commissioned, and we are now underway for the repowering of the wind farm to make it really happen, and that tariffs get more affordable. And then we can go to the next slide. Most of it I already told, and that's a combination of the multiple resources to get the security of supply in combination with affordable tariffs. And we can't rely on wind in itself, and we have a couple of additional challenges. What's not really covered in the current law and regulation, and that's more decentralized generation and storage in residential homes, and also in more and more businesses also do decentralized renewable generation and storage. And with all those renewable generation is solar based, so that won't happen at night. What we really face at the moment is peaks in nighttime, and we still have to think on the two sides, the security of supply as well as tariffs. And for that, we have the strategic choices on the next slide. We face the fuel consumption. That's a large part. You remember from Constantine's presentation. Lower investment in fuel storage is given from the government in The Hague, also in light of renewable policies. We want to get move back from high reliance on fuel. We used to use HFO for generation. Well, actually, ContourGlobal used to rely on HFO. We already switched to LFO, but still, for the main part, wind should be the main source of renewable energy and use to store it in batteries in daytime and use it at nighttime for the peak at nighttime, when most solar centralized and with households and small businesses do not produce anything. And we also want to fit in Bonaire's Blue Destination branding and to reduce CO2. And also,
yes. Can I ask you to wrap up in the next few minutes?
Yes, I have 2 slides left that show the tariff consequences and how they can drop down to the tariffs, and I think we can share it afterwards in writing. And basically the blue line, that's is what's going to happen if we don't do anything tariff-wise. And I think the next slide, just jump to the next slide. That's more simple slide. This is the production tariffs, which is going to reflect in the end user tariffs. But that, and this slide shows the blue line is without the renewables. The brown line is how we are underway with the PV farm commissioned this year, including the battery storage. And what we hope to achieve by repowering the wind turbines with the larger turbines in the coming years is a significant drop in production tariff, and that will also reflect in a significant drop in end user tariff. And along it, we still have to think the island grows. The demand is rising, is really rising. And also a lot of investments are needed for production as well as in the distribution grid. And with this tariff drop in the production, we can keep it all affordable and still keep security of supply given the growth of the island possible. And I think this is the main aspects also given the time. My email address is on the last page of the slide, so anyone who has additional questions, just email me.
Yeah, Gilbert, do you want to address the question now, or do you want to send it separately to Mariken? I have the file open.
If it takes too long, I just share it. I just wanted to share people the way we in Curaçao.
I'm gonna take over the screen here. You will stop the others. That's fine. So for the others, I already figured out. Marieke, can you mute yourself for a second? Yeah. So Gilbert sent this file to me, and so for the record, one NAF is $1.82 US. So this comes
contrary. One US dollars is 1.82 guilders.
Yeah, so this is $0.38. Right?
Guilders.
Yeah.
Was a little sense, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So the main thing here is I think we do the same though with different unity, because I just wanted to highlight, for instance, with usual household use of energy, we have 3 brackets. The one that less than 250 kilowatt hours, in between 250 to 350, and for the bigger one, higher than 350, we have different tariffs that I must address that the regulator here in Curaçao has detailed information about all this. But my main thing is the way we act. I would say do the same thing, but again with other unities, because like a Bonaire, we have postpaid and prepaid, and not only for energy, but also water. But the thing is that I notice the way the people had to calculate in terms of usage of amperes in comparison with the power we use. So in your meter at home, you get that indication and you can compare immediately. Though when you use prepaid, there's still a different way of calculating it. But I find it remarkable. I've been Bonaire every time, but I never stood still about the way it has been charged. So that's news for me.
This is per year?
No, per month.
Per month, yeah. I was thinking.
So every month we recalculate everything and then publicize it.
So you start from scratch every month, yeah.
Yeah, so to say.
Yeah.
And we separate it also in tariff groups, because we separate water, for instance. There's the and also for the use of irrigation and the hospital and stuff. So we made those definitions. And since we are accustomed to this, it was like, oops, if I go into live to Bonaire, then I have another way doing the same, but another different way to make those calculations. So it's interesting. And I'll be sending Mariken some info so we can share, and make some comparison.
Yeah.
And besides, I mentioned the asterisk behind is because we charge from 6 o'clock in the morning up to 11 or 10 in the night. And then from 10 night to the 6, we have another tariff.
Another tariff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's typical, the 2-hour tariff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I want to share. Thanks.
Yeah, Robert, I suggest we add that to the platform as soon as the platform is available as well, so that people can indeed start comparing. We're going to Christina now. As yesterday, we'll probably be taking a little longer, but I really want you to hear her presentation because she has so much experience on islands. She works for DNV. It's a whole DNV day today.
Seems that way.
Yeah, Marieke was also using DNV. So guys, you now know whom to contact her. But I have no shares in DNV, just to be clear. But we do work with them, so that's why we asked them here. But Marieke has been working on Puerto Rico as well as on other islands. So Christina, I'm going to let you present yourselves. That's going to be much easier.
No problem. And I can share my screen also. Let's see. Share. Let's make that. Come on. Okay, so you can see my screen, the right screen. Okay, good. So my name is Christina Copito-Pulga. I'm also at DNV. I'm in the Netherlands, but I spent the past 13 years in the US, and I did work a lot with the Department of Energy, and via that work, a lot with Puerto Rico and what was going on in their work from pretty much 2017 and forward after Maria and Irma to the big hurricanes hit. But this presentation is a little bit more about regulations and different incentives that the US has that these islands can also use, and how they have their own incentives, whether it is policies, whether it is financial incentives, and kind of how they work them together to try and reach their own decarbonization goals. So I'm going to skip this and skip this because we all know that. Okay, so maybe a short distinction about the regulatory landscape in the US, because it is a little bit like you in the islands that are in the Caribbean have, for example, the Netherlands, but then you might not be part of the Netherlands, but you're part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So in a bit of a similar way, there's the federal government for the US, right? So that's the overarching government. And then each state or each territory will have their own policies and regulations. So what's common is that the federal policies kind of are overarching, and they work also as guidance for some of the state policies or the territory policies. And in the same way, financial incentives that come out of the federal government, may they be used also in the same way or in an approximate way from the states or the territories. So that's when we look at the territories, for example, it depends on whether an island is actually part of the US. For example, Hawaii is part of the US, whereas Puerto Rico is a territory. So the federal guidelines still are valid, but Puerto Rico, for example, does not go by the federal regulations. They only go by their own regulations, whereas Hawaii also goes by the federal regulations. So there's a little bit of complexity there, but I think it's similar from what I hear here about how maybe Bonaire and how Curaçao are different for the Netherlands or the other islands in the Caribbean. This is just an overview of some of the federal financial incentives that are available currently in the US. So those are all valid for Hawaii, for example, but they're not truly valid for Puerto Rico. But what Puerto Rico has done is looked at some of them and has adjusted them to fit their own needs. So it's a lot. We're not going to go through all of them, but it's just like an idea. And I will share the presentation. I can show you where you can find all this information if you're actually interested in going a bit deeper and seeing what's beneath all these. But the first one, the Business Energy Investment Tax Credit, that is one of the biggest ones that has been, it initiated in 2002, but it has changed multiple times. So the last change was when the US, the Inflation Reduction Act came out in 2022. And that was a big deal for the US, where they were really looking to increase renewables, but also the competitiveness of the US when it comes to renewable energy. So the business tax, what it really does is provide a tax credit to a specific technologies. So solar, wind, biomass, combined heat and power, hydrogen. There's a number of technologies that fall under this the tax credit, and what the developers, or whether it is a residential person, or it is a commercial, or it is a independent power producer, it's valid for everybody that actually pays taxes. So if they have the tax credit, they can use this and get up to 30% a tax credit for the systems they're building. And they have all these additional bonuses, as they call in this specific one. For example, if they have the domestic content bonus, which means that if all the materials are coming from the US or US territories, they get an additional 10% on top of that. If the farm, let's say it's a solar farm, if it's going to be built in what they call an energy community, and that could be a brownfield, or it could be where there used to be a power plant, a fossil power plant, but that's not operational anymore. So if they build there, they get another 10% on top of that. So there's a buildup depending on where something will be built, and they add all these different, in this case, it's a tax credit. So that is an interesting an interesting policy that the US has. And then that couples well with the second one, which is the modified accelerated cost recovery. So it's increased depreciation pretty much. So which is a 5-year depreciation scheme instead of going for the longer term. So coupling those two together works well for also independent power producers that are interested in building these larger systems. Again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but as you can see, there's a number of different things, and it goes anywhere from residential to commercial, to the utilities themselves. So it just depends on what what the theme is of the specific tax credit, or it could be a bond, or it could be a loan or loan guarantee. So all these different financial incentives out there to help both individuals and companies kind of build up renewable energy. And then more specifically, maybe for the islands, I just picked a few which are kind of a common theme in the US islands and territories. So they all have a renewables portfolio standard. As you can see, some of them started fairly early, with Hawaii being the first that did it in 2001. And the standards are really based for the utilities, right? So they tell the utility, now you need to produce X amount of your generation by renewables by year X. So they're all different. Some are standards and they're obligatory, so the utilities are obligated to follow them. Some are just targets that are saying, let's help, let's work together and try to reach these goals. So Hawaii is the most extreme one. They had the one in 2001, but then they just changed it a couple of years ago, and they're going for 100% renewables by 2045. Puerto Rico has a 20% renewables by 2035. That wasn't the standard, but that has changed since the standard came out. So they have increased also that one. The US Virgin Islands, for example, is 20% by 15, 25 by 2020, 30 by 2025, and then increasing up to 51% whenever they're able to reach that. So they all have something like that. Then they couple with that the net metering, and that is both for residential customers, but also commercial or industrial customers. They're not really, sometimes there's a different tariff associated with it, but that exists still there. So that's another way of trying to get more renewables on the ground. And then the third one, which we sometimes forget about, is energy building code, and how efficiency is actually the first step we should be looking at before we start to include all these renewables, right? If we can first reduce the consumption, that makes a big difference. Then we don't need as many renewables to meet the different goals. So then when we're looking at financial incentives specifically, I just picked out here Puerto Rico and Hawaii. And these are the ones that are only from the islands themselves. So this is not to do with the federal government. This is just what the government on the islands has decided to provide. So again, you'll see they have tax incentives, tax exemptions for private property, whether it's corporate or residential or personal. They have exceptions for farmers if they're interested in doing renewable on former farmland or farmland that is not being used anymore or as part of the farmland. And then if we look at Hawaii, then the utilities themselves also some have additional incentives that they are able to give to their customers. For example, this KIUC is the Kauai utility, local utility. So they have, for example, solar water heating loans or rebate programs for the customers. So there's a variety of different things that are possible. Which works for which island, of course, depends on the island, depends on the structure, and depends on a number of things like, are you interconnected to another island or the mainland or not at all? I mean, there's all these things that you obviously know better.
Christina, but the money for these things, because it's linked to tax incentives, but some are also credits, rebates, subsidies. Where does the money, is the money coming through the tariff? Is it collected through the tariff, or is it part of?
Not per se. So some are really their government funds. So where they have gotten them, I would not be able to tell you, but if it's a tax credit, for example, it's like you would get a tax credit for something else. The ones from the utilities, they do, yes, they come from some kind of tariff structure, if it's specific from the utility, or if they are coming from the, let's say the federal government, say for Hawaii, if it's coming from the federal government because of some act that came out from Congress or whoever, then they typically have to either work it through the tariff and include some kind of cost percentage in the tariff to be able to provide the rebates, or again, it's coming from the government, the federal government, for example, because there is a pot of money somewhere. So again, it depends. It's really dependent on the type of financial incentive that they're giving. Okay, so I'm gonna run because we're running late. So Puerto Rico is interesting. It's the closest island, at least to the ones we have here on the call. At least it's in the Caribbean. And I think that was interesting about talking about these islands and not islands in Europe is because they're completely different, right? So the needs are completely different than the Greek islands, for example, or the islands in Spain. So in this case, Puerto Rico is a population of 3 million, a total area of about 9,000 kilometers. And here you can see their tariffs and how they actually are different from the continental average. So they're higher. Puerto Rico is about double from what the costs are in the continental US, which makes sense, of course, because they mostly run on fuel oil and they need to get it there. And you all are aware this adds cost, and that's why it's more expensive.
And how is the GDP from Puerto Rico compared to the United States?
It's lower. I don't have the number on site, but I think it's probably, if I remember correctly, it's probably about half. It might be even lower. I can look it up though. And the EIA has that information and it's easy to be found too. And I've got the link down here too. So what happened with Puerto Rico, which I'm sure a lot of you know, but in 2017, you had the hurricanes Irma and Maria, which pretty much wiped out the grid almost completely. So it was one of the biggest blackouts in the US, at least history. Some of the parts of the island were out of electricity for almost a year. So there was no electricity at all. Some were lucky enough to have backup diesel generators, and that's how they made it through. And then anything from communications, water and wastewater, transportation, healthcare, critical manufacturing. So all of those sectors had experienced very severe disruptions because of the grid, either because the grid was not set up again or yet, or because there was a lot of instability in the grid as it was being built back up. So with that, after the hurricane in 2019, the legislator passed another law. It's called the Puerto Rico Energy Public Policy Act. So they set a goal to meet 100% of their electricity with renewable energy by 2050. With these interim targets. So 40% renewable electricity by 2025, 60% by 2040, to phase out all coal by 2028, and then to also improve energy efficiency by 30% by 2040. So that was the goal that came out after the hurricane had kind of wiped out the grid. And then in 2022, another hurricane hit, and it again wiped out a big part of the grid again. So now they were out of power for almost a month. So this is, I mean, it's an extreme case for Puerto Rico. I think they're really in the path of the hurricanes, but if you think of the Virgin Islands, they are in a similar path. So it's not that it is unique only to them. So what happened with Puerto Rico is that the federal government did step in, even though they are not their territory, and they are working with the Department of Energy mostly, but other federal agencies to figure out how they can actually modernize the grid and include these renewables. So these are a number of actions that they have going on now. So they have the Puerto Rico Grid Resilience and Transitions to 100% renewables. This is a study like the one that you were talking about, Marikin. So it's really a roadmap about how are they going to do this? How are you going to include all these renewables? Which resources are actually available on the island? Where can you place them? Which capacities, and so on and so forth, doing the impact modeling analysis, doing all these different scenarios, and then, well, in the end, distributing it and going for it and starting to implement them. They have the ongoing is the Puerto Rico Energy Resilience Fund. So that is, again, from the federal government funds that are coming. It's $1 billion allocated to improve the grid resiliency of the island. And they do have a focus on the most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. There's specific parts within this regulation and with this block of money that is really allocated to lower income communities. That was in 2022, and then the next year, 450 million of that 1 billion has been allocated for residential rooftop and hybrid systems with battery storage. So the expectation is that they will have anywhere from 30,000 to 40,000 residential systems implemented with this funds, including educational systems to help support kind of the maintenance and the long-term use of these systems. Then they have another grid resiliency grant. That's another almost 7.5 million for grid modernization and grid upgrades. Again, a lot of money coming from the federal government to help rebuild the grid, pretty much.
Tina, if I see this amount, like 450 million, I was just looking up the number of inhabitants. That's like making sure that nearly everyone can buy it, right?
Yes, so these are, I mean, 3 million is the approximate population in Puerto Rico is 3 million. So yes, the idea is that this funds will be available for, again, starting with lower income and then going to others as it becomes available. Yeah. So the idea is to spread out these solar systems throughout the different parts of the island. Solar and storage systems. And these are all working. So for these different programs, they're working with a number of stakeholders, of course. It's not just the government. They're working with PREPA, so the utility, and LUMA, and which is now, so PREPA used to be the only utility on the island, but it was already having some financial issues. And then with Maria hit, they had to declare bankruptcy. Which meant that they had a reconstruction. And now PREPA is pretty much responsible for generation on the island, and LUMA is pretty much the TSO and the DSO on the island, and LUMA is a private company. So they're working through these programs, they're working with the Puerto Rico government, with the utilities, and with a number of stakeholder groups, and with different federal groups in the US. Okay, so there's some more. They also do technical assistance on top of that. So they do the funding, but they also are offering technical assistance to help them kind of implement these different systems and figure out, again, with the map, helping then specific, let's say, specific communities to figure out, well, if you want to install solar, how much, when, do pretty much the technical analysis.
And
so they're
linked
doing
to
that.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I remember the images from after the hurricane where the limited amount of PV that was there was blown away.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Is there regulation with regards to a safe implementation, like a wind resilient construction?
This should be in these different packages. Now that they're doing that Puerto Rico, they call it PR 100, that study. That study is really designed to figure out within Puerto Rico itself, where should you install what type of technologies and what are the standards that you need to use to be able to, to use them. Because again, most of the solar is interconnected to the main grid, and a lot of them will not operate if the grid goes down anyway. Okay, the way so it was designed.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea is, if we're looking to increase the resiliency, you need to make sure that these systems are designed in that way that they can actually operate independent of the main grid if something, again, if part of the grid goes down for whatever reason.
Yeah, Marieke, that's also relevant on the wind side of the island in your case, no? I remember seeing everything that had come with the floods and the waste that was still there years later. Whatever.
So they have those programs, and then they have these different technical assistance programs, and it's really to help because there's so much funding coming to the island. These technical assistance programs is really to try and help them figure out how to spend them and where to spend it, reasonably, and in the best and most efficient way possible. So they're also working with PREPA and LUMA. This is from the Department of Energy, to do microgrid design, modeling, and analysis, figure out where, how, and when. And then this other thing they're developing now is called the Rapid Toolkit. And that is, it's really a toolkit that will have all these regulatory and permitting information for developers that want to start installing systems. So how do you go about doing it? What should you look out for? What permitting needs do you have? And all these different steps you need to follow to be able to install a system and develop a system. So that is the part of Puerto Rico. And I just have a little bit of Hawaii, just because it's so, it's one of the islands that has a lot of renewables already, and they're kind of out there in the middle of nowhere by themselves. So they're really, there's no connection to anything. So Hawaii has pretty much 6 main islands. They're all their own system. So they're not interconnected, the islands between themselves. So again, like Bonaire, they're just their own electricity grid. So there's a smaller population, about 1.4 million people, a much larger mass, but they have really 2 utilities, and mostly Hawaiian Electric is the largest one, and it serves 95% of the islands. So 5 out of the 6 islands, and then Kauai has its own kind of local utility. And here you can see now that Hawaii has even more expensive electricity rates than Puerto Rico does. So they're about 3.5 to 4 times the average of the US. And then for their current use, the majority again is petroleum, but they do have 22% of renewables on the island right now. So one of the big steps for Hawaii was the Clean Energy Initiative, which is really a framework of statutes and regulations that are supported by a number of stakeholders between the utility, the government, and locals to try and push Hawaii to decarbonize. So in 2008, the Department of Energy and the state of Hawaii decided to sign a memorandum of understanding that say they're going to collaborate to try to reduce their dependence on imported fossil fuel. That was the first step. And then in 2014, they kind of upped that again, the commitment, and they changed the goal to become 100% renewables by 2045. So what Hawaiian Electric, so from the utility side, what they've done is they created this integrated grid plan. They started in 2018, and they just published their first major draft was in May, and then in March, and then in May they published an actual updated plan. So that was really a way, again, what they're trying to do is figure out, well, how am I going to do this? So they included a number of near-term actions, and I think a lot of them are the ones that you're also thinking about is expanding customer choices with new programs so they can make it more affordable to actually participate in the clean energy and in storage and in energy efficiency. They want to stabilize the rates by adding larger scale renewable generation and energy storage and not just kind of rooftop. And this one thing they did calculate is that though it's going to be more expensive now to do the renewables, in long term, it will be cheaper than relying on fossil fuels as the world decarbonizes and fossil fuels become more expensive just by adding all these taxes and carbon and on all that. Ensuring reliability when you add the renewables, because as you're adding, of course, a lot of renewables that will destabilize your grid. So you need to figure out what you're going to do to stabilize the grid itself. So there's a lot of different studies going on that. I think in many different parts of different countries. It's not just for the islands. Ensuring the reliability, of course, of the generation and firm generation. So they have some plans about what that will look like in the future when you're talking about renewable firm generation. So it has to do more with biofuels and maybe tidal or wave energy. But those are not, they're not at the place yet that they can be used in anything but really pilot systems right now. And one of the big things is engaging the communities before they start planning the different like larger scale utility scale systems, because that is a thing that comes up a lot, not only on the islands but everywhere, is that we want to install these things but nobody really wants them in their backyard. So it's good to engage the different communities from the beginning as they're starting to have these conversations. And of course, they want to reduce the costs for the customers, but getting more federal funding. So that's another thing. It's like, where are we going to get the funding? We'll try to get it from the federal government. So they have some key findings and recommendations. These 4 things are kind of the main blocks they came out with, which is stabilize the utility rates, to advance energy equity, to grow the marketplace for both customer and large-scale systems, to modernize the grid and make it resilient, and then to secure reliability through a number of different technologies and not just focus on only solar, only wind, or one of those technologies. So let's see, and we've got 2 more slides on. Too much. Okay, so Maui, this is just an example. They have already 200 megawatts of solar and wind. By next year, they're adding another 75 megawatts of solar and storage. And you can see on the little map what they have so far. They also have hydro, they also have biomass. So they have a number of different systems. And then those wheels down there show what their plan is to reach what the expected mix is when they reach the 2045 goal. As you can see, it's mostly solar. What's the yellow is the utility scale solar, but then the green is more the customer sided distributed energy, which realistically is just solar, maybe with some storage attached to it. So the other thing that's in that plan that came out is, of course, well, what do they need to be able to do it? Because there's a lot of things that are out of the utilities control, right? The plans came out of doing these systems and being carbon free by 2045. But there's a number of things that need to be, a lot of things that need to accommodate, let's say, the technology to be able to implement these systems that are not part of the utility. I'm not going to go through them. There's a lot of the things are similar to what I already mentioned on the different policies that the federal government is already having and different incentives. But a lot of them, of course, have to do with technology development and being able to introduce technologies that are not yet financially, let's say, economically feasible for a utility to implement without any external help. And then land use policies, permitting policies, making it easier to actually build all these things and not having to wait years and years before they're able to install these systems. I think that's my last slide. So I'm going to stop. I know I talk a lot. It's a lot of information. But I also have my emails on the last slide. So I'm happy if anybody has additional questions to email me and we can talk about it.
Any questions for Christina? No, I mean, we interrupted you already throughout the presentation.
That's fine.
Anyone else? If not, then we thank you for every one of you. So Constanta and Christina, we make sure that the email addresses are available. Marieke, normally the others have your email address normally already, but we'll make sure that that all that is shared. Also, the presentations will be shared. We're still checking with the Go team to see whether the platform will be ready in time. If not, then we'll figure out another way. So all very, grateful for having you as speakers, Marieke and Constanta and Christina. Thanks from our side. And then we wish the islands a nice and productive afternoon, and for us, a nice end of the day. Thank you all.
Many thanks also.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Bye
Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Janet. Wait.